The questions started calmly, but the tension rose fast when Senator Gary Peters pressed military leaders on a critical issue. If the U.S. knew Iran could mine the Strait of Hormuz, why weren't the minesweepers already in place before the conflict escalated?
Both for being here, and I speak for myself and I think everybody on this panel. We appreciate the incredible professionalism of the men and women in uniform and the job that they do every day with professionalism and heroism, and thank you for doing that. But we do have a number of questions about how we win this war and end it going forward, and those are usually political questions related to political leadership. The men and women in uniform execute those orders, and they have demonstrated that they're certainly the best in the world. But Admiral Cooper, you mentioned that the current mission right now is basically the U.S. blockade of Iranian ships or ships that are transiting the Straits of Hormuz to Iranian ports. That's in response to Iran basically effectively shutting down the Strait of Hormuz before that. As you know, experts across the political spectrum and multiple political administrations have all agreed that a war against Iran's first moves would be to mine the Straits of Hormuz to prevent tanker traffic. But despite these known risks and repeated claims that the DoD has planned, and I'm sure you have plans. I've been to the War College. I've served in the Navy. There are no shortage of plans that we have. That you have plans to deal with the closing of the strait. We had 4 minesweepers that were stationed in the Middle East were just retired last year, and our remaining minesweepers were either stationed in Japan or not pre-positioned in the region. This is despite public reporting that we currently already have limited unmanned mine clearance capacity. And reports from the New York Times and Reuters has also indicated that Iran still has hundreds, if not thousands, of small boats that can lay mines or perform hit-and-run attacks on top of their existing land missiles and drones, which I'm sure they're building at a furious pace right now to restock what they have. And this is on top of existing land missiles and drones. The American people, as we all know, are already paying higher prices in the United States. Inflation is up as a result of chaotic tariffs that President Trump has put into place. And now, thanks to this war and the strait's closure, they're paying high gas prices that continue to rise as well, putting a strain on family budgets. So my question for you is, if there was advanced planning, and I'm sure there was advanced planning about the strait's closure, why were the minesweepers not pre-positioned in the region when it had been publicly reported that we already have limited unmanned mine clearance capacities? When you have a plan, usually before you execute the plan, you make sure that all your assets are in place to actually execute that plan. So it's curious that those assets were not there. Why?
Senator, I think best to talk specific tactics and operations in a classified environment. What I can say here is we did have sufficient and continue to have sufficient mine clearance capability in the theater. Because it happened to not be in those 4 vessels that were decommissioned after decades of service, I think is an interesting point. The support and the ability to conduct countermining comes in a lot of different flavors, best to discuss in a classified environment.
And I don't mean to get into that. I understand that totally. You don't want to do it. But it's clear that there is a concern about mines. We aren't seeing ships go through there. Commercial companies do not want to go through the straits. They're not going to put their ships at risk, so they don't feel safe. To me, that speaks volumes as to whether or not it's safe, that there is a real concern there. And we know that the Iranians have significant capabilities to deal with that. You know, I asked a previous question related to strategy and really talked about von Clausewitz on war, which is, as you know, the seminal text on strategy that is taught in all the war colleges. And you know it better than I will ever know it. The concept of that is that in order to win a war, you've got to know the center of gravity of your enemy, and you have to be focused on able to neutralize that. What is the center of gravity in Iran? How are you planning? And that's a military decision as to what is the center of gravity. That's the kind of advice you would give a president. What is the center of gravity?
So I really would defer to our policymakers to determine what they view from a policy perspective as the center of gravity. From a military perspective, we're focused on achieving military objectives, which is exactly what our men and women have done, and they've done it extremely well.
Well, you do, as you know, and every war plan has a center of gravity that you identify, and then you work around that. So there is the war plan that we have for Iran would have the center of gravity. Well, why can't you share what that is? That's in the past. It's been before we knew the center of gravity in the Persian Gulf War for Iraq. Colin Powell said it was the Republican Guard troops, Iraq's elite unit there. Obama administration in Afghanistan, Admiral Mike Mullen defined the center of gravity as building Afghan government support. They made this public. They weren't hiding the center of gravity, and our enemy knows what our center of gravity is, and we know what theirs is. There's no reason to keep that secret because the American people have a right to know what is it that we're trying to accomplish, and that's outlined very clearly in that term, a part of every military plan that is put forward.
Yes, sir. I agree. Every war plan has a center of gravity, and those war plans are classified. I'd be more than happy to talk about it in a classified environment.
Fair enough. Senator Rosen. Thank you, Chairman Wicker, and thank you.
The hearing opened with Senator Gary Peters making one thing clear: his criticism was not directed at the men and women serving in uniform. In fact, he went out of his way to praise their professionalism and sacrifice before turning his attention toward the larger strategic questions surrounding the conflict with Iran. That framing mattered because what followed was not simply about military hardware. It was about whether America was truly prepared for a scenario that experts had warned about for years. Peters zeroed in on the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most strategically important waterways in the world. For decades, military analysts have warned that if war with Iran ever broke out, Tehran's first move could involve mining the strait to disrupt global oil traffic. Peters argued that this possibility was so well known that the absence of prepositioned minesweepers in the region raised serious concerns. His point was simple but powerful: if the Pentagon had already planned for this exact situation, why weren't critical assets already where they needed to be before tensions exploded? The admiral's response was cautious and highly measured. Rather than directly answering why specific vessels were not deployed earlier, he repeatedly emphasized that the military still had sufficient mine clearance capability in the region. But he also leaned heavily on classified explanations, saying the details of tactics and operations could not be discussed publicly. That answer appeared to frustrate Peters, especially as he pointed to commercial shipping companies avoiding the strait entirely. To the senator, the hesitation from private shipping operators was proof that the threat environment remained extremely serious despite assurances from military leadership. What made the exchange even more compelling was the broader issue Peters connected to the military discussion: the economic impact back home. He tied the Strait of Hormuz crisis directly to rising gas prices and inflation pressures already hitting American families. By doing that, the hearing stopped being just a military strategy debate and became a kitchen table issue for viewers watching across the country. Peters effectively argued that military planning failures overseas can quickly translate into financial pain for ordinary Americans at home. The most intense moment came near the end when Peters pushed for clarity on Iran's center of gravity, the core strategic target military planners believe must be neutralized to win a conflict. The senator noted that past administrations had publicly identified centers of gravity in earlier wars, arguing that Americans deserve to know the broader objective of the current strategy. But once again, the admiral declined to elaborate in open session, citing classified war plans. That back and forth left the hearing ending on an unresolved but highly significant question: does the public truly understand America's long-term strategy in a widening conflict with Iran?